They left us the Wall Street Journal. That's
Yes,
fine.
mine.
Oh, okay. Good. So, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today. And I just want to start by thanking Alan. We just figured out just now that we have known each other at the Crocker for almost 23 years, which is pretty incredible. And in that amount of time, I've watched Alan kind of go from making nice gifts, but on the smaller end of the spectrum, to really becoming the preeminent donor to our European collection. And I'm just tremendously grateful for what he's done for the Crocker's collection and how he's really helped put us on the map on an international level. People all over the world know about us, largely thanks to you. So anyway, I think we should give him a big round of applause for that.
Thank you.
Let's see what that looks like. So today, it's called Collecting at the Crocker and Collecting for the Crocker. Conversation with Scott and Alan. And I have some questions that I wanted to ask him with images, because I always like more to talk about art when I can see it. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions for all of you to ask. But I think we'll just launch right in. And this is Bernardo Strozzi, Youthful Christ, a Savior of the World, circa 1618. And it's a lovely painting. I remember we got it just about the same time that the same subject came up by, quote unquote, Leonardo da Vinci, and I don't know where we stand on whether it's him or not, but anyway, it sold for $500 million. But I think ours is just as beautiful and didn't cost quite that much. But it wasn't free in any case. So it's a lovely and compelling painting, but I'm curious why this particular Strozzi versus another, and what appealed to you about it.
It's an artist I like very much, going back decades. Strozzi is a very interesting character. So he's from Genoa. I wanted to find a good one. And something that he does extremely well is devotional scenes done in a really tender register. So you see how beautiful it is. And it's even better in person. I had looked for a long time to find a good Strozzi. And it's several things. It's that this is, the reason we think it's from 1618 is that it's in this period when his art is still a little bit Mannerist, but also Baroque. And you can see at the bottom, look at those very thin, long fingers. And the use of color is beautiful and unusual. Look at that violet clothing contrasted with the green, contrasted with the hair. It's just an extremely beautiful example of his art, and I wanted a good one, and it was offered to me by a very good art dealer, Jean-Luc Baroni, who is a real expert on especially Italian old masters. The condition is virtually flawless. So I'm always looking for good quality, artistic value, historic value, and also it's something that the Crocker didn't have in several different ways. And it's also of a relatively modest scale, so I knew it would fit well into the galleries. It's the thing, I think, in a way that I've learned over the years that I didn't know before, is that for various artists, you have to know when it's good enough. And this is more than good enough. So part of it is a calculation based on what else I've seen over the years. I did start buying art with the Crocker in mind 23 years ago. And in these recent years, I definitely have more confidence about when to say yes and when to say no. It's beautifully done, and I think it may also be surreptitiously a portrait of a younger family member. And that's something else. I always like it when the picture is doing more than one thing. So in this era, sometimes family members are posing in the guise of a religious or mythological figure. I think that might be happening here. I also knew I might never find another one as good. So I think it works well. And Originally, it was part of a pair. There's also a picture of Mary that the two were meant to go together. They've been separated for centuries. But you have to imagine that this would have been in someone's home, in a bedroom or a study. And I do also often gravitate towards works that, regardless of the subject, were meant for a intimate setting like a home.
Do we know where Mary is?
It is listed in the best monograph on him, and I believe it just says private collection. So it's probably in someone's very nice home in Italy.
And I wanted to point out, for those of you that don't understand accession numbers, most of you probably do, but 2018.67 means that it was acquired in 2018, and it was the 67th object we got in that particular year. So that gives you a clue as to when things came into the collection. And sometimes if it has like a point A or point B, it might be a teacup and a saucer that go together, but technically get separate numbers. So that's just a little hint. So here's a beautiful thing, Alexander Roslan. Certainly one of the great portraits now in the Crocker's collection, but there's much more that makes it special.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first thing to keep in mind, this is probably the only time I will be able to give the Crocker a picture that's relatively famous. It's been reproduced a great... Now, when I say famous, I mean people who like the 18th century, right? So it's not like the biggest club, but it's a very nice club. And this is really, it's one of the best portraits from the late 18th century. There's several things about it. It's the subject, the sitter, is Anne Vallière-Coster, who was, at this time, the leading still life painter of France. And it was painted by her neighbor, Alexandre Rosselin, he's originally from Sweden, so the Swedish would be Alexander Roslin, but he settled in Paris. He married a French woman. He became part of the Paris art scene. They both, Anne Vallière-Coster and Alexandre Rosselin, they were both given free rent apartments at the Louvre. And this was a brilliant strategy of the French, going back, I think, to the late 17th century, where certain highly desirable artists were given free housing and easy access to the royal collections to keep them in Paris. It's part of the reason Paris is such an important art center. Most countries were never this conscious about art patronage and retaining talent. So it's two neighbors who knew each other well. She didn't pay for the portrait with money. She gave Rosselin one of her still lifes. It was a trade among colleagues and families who knew each other. It's a masterpiece. It's also in the original frame. I studied it carefully. I found this at Galerie Quatellem in Paris. Eric Quatellem is my favorite French art dealer. He gets tremendous stuff. I thought about it for a long time because it was a bigger effort, but I decided here too that I was never going to find a better one. So it's something extraordinary. If the 18th century were more in fashion, I would have never gotten it. It was shown to the curators at the Louvre. They thought about it. They said no. They came back 2 years later after I had bought it and asked if it was still available. So part of what's great about the Crocker is that if I propose something nice, and William Brazil thinks it's a good idea, and then it doesn't take very long for Scott and Lyle to decide it's a good idea.
Usually immediately.
That's a huge advantage, and I actually think part of the reason the Louvre took so long to say yes, even though it was painted in the Louvre, they're both great artists, it checks all the boxes, it's because he's Swedish and not French-born. So it took him a little bit longer to get to yes. But it's one of the advantages of being American is that you don't, I certainly feel no obligation to give American art unless I want to. And the museum tries to be good good at many different things, which I think is the right way to go. So I'm not Swedish, I'm not French, but I do have a good eye. And this is the top of the top for this category.
And she just left to go back to Europe for a little bit.
Yes,
So
it's being lent.
yes, so we'll get her back. Always makes me a nervous wreck, but particularly with a frame like that, because it's got so many parts, and but it's important. We want to share when we can, and if it's a worthy, exhibition to share with, we definitely try. So we miss her, but she'll come back.
Yeah.
So Morazzoni, this is one of my favorites. I always think of, when we talk about mannerism, the Madonna with the long neck is the very famous painting of Mannerist painting. We have the Madonna with the long fingers. So can you tell us a little bit more about the connections to Mannerism, and particularly to Lombardy?
Yeah, so here, this is from almost exactly at the same time as the Strozzi. They're both from around 1618. This is from Milan. This was painted in Milan, that was painted in Genoa. At this time in northern Italy, there's this synthesis of what's considered the older art, Mannerism, and this new art that we now call Baroque. So he's mixing the two. And that's why there's this sense that comes out of the early to mid 16th century that when you're depicting important people from the sacred stories, that they should not look like your next door neighbor. They should look special. So that means elegance, which often means long and thin in some way, the long, elegant fingers, the elaborate hairdo. I suspect Mary didn't have this much time to do her hair. Right? It's elegant. This is not the woman next door. At the same time, there's this new spirit of the Baroque, the dramatic lighting, which is even more clear in person. The beauty of the red clothing, especially when you see it in person. It's a series of different reds. It's masterfully done. When you're in front of it, it feels like Mary is right in front of you. And then the religious aspect is just the dove in the upper left corner representing the Holy Spirit, just very elegantly placed. This was also part of a pair that was split up. With the angel Gabriel in the other. It's Mary of the Annunciation. But we just see Mary in isolation. And to me, I think it's extremely beautiful. The Lombard school, Milan being the capital of Lombardy, the Lombard school is not very well represented in American museums. It's often been underappreciated. And when this came along, I thought, this is a great opportunity to get a first-rate painting from Lombardy. Morazzoni is a very good artist, but very little of his work has ever left Europe. And I've been trying purposely with a number of the acquisitions to offer the Crocker works that are of high quality, artistically and historically, by artists that are not very well represented in America, and especially not in California. It may be the only Morazzoni painting in the Western US. It's a fine example. I'll probably never see another one this good for sale.
Is the dove? I don't remember that many uses of the dove as the Holy Spirit.
Oh yeah, it's one of the conventions. Yeah, that appears over and over again. But usually there's more going on.
Yeah.
So this is such a reduce because we have half of the pair. You notice more, there are only two figures. It's Mary and the dove. But it's there. And it's also the suggestion that light is divine and carries knowledge. And so especially when you're a person, the light plays such a big role. It's one of the things that photography is very bad at reproducing, is the subtlety of light effects in good art. So photography tends to make bad art look better, and it makes good art look worse, because it simplifies the lighting scheme. And so much of quality are these really fine distinctions that you have to see in person.
So here's another beautiful
Yeah.
portrait.
Actually, let me show you, just because this really is about the photography problem. So this looks like a huge black mass for his clothing, but it's actually a series of different blacks. There's all of this careful modeling within the drapery, which is lost in the reproduction. It's also true with the face, is beautifully modeled. So this is Philippe de Champagne, who actually grew up in Brussels, so he's Flemish, but he moved to France, to Paris, when he was 19. He never looked back. And the French started calling him French in the 19th century. But before then, he was always considered a Flemish artist who worked in Paris. I think they still think Rosselin is Swedish and not French, so that'll take another century. But it's a really good, I do like good portraiture, and this is an extraordinarily good example. We don't know who the sitter is, but it's probably someone very important in France. And it's a good example of a certain crowd in Europe who were very important and wealthy and well-connected, but didn't want to show off too much. So it's very restrained. But this is probably someone really important, maybe a minister of state, maybe a great financier, a writer, somebody important. But what you see here is just an examination of his personality. And I think it's really good and different than the other things I've given.
In terms of it seems so modern with all the black on black on black.
Yeah.
Is that typical of the artist, or how typical is it of portraiture of this period, of this particular artist?
It's typical of a certain kind of important French person who's trying to show that he doesn't care about money, even though he has a lot of it.
Yeah.
And Philippe de Champagne made a lot of portraits of really important people who are trying to play down their money, but who are, because they want to be seen as intelligent and virtuous. So it's a category he excelled in, because the artist himself was very successful and also trying to play down his wealth. So it's a way of saying, I'm serious. I'm not like some of these characters who have themselves portrayed with all of their finery. I'm a serious person. It's a little bit like Downton Abbey, the characters who are trying to, some of whom try to play down their wealth and some don't. This is the crowd that wants to be judged on their intellect. I think it's an interesting, I wasn't actually raised with any particular religion, but my father was from a very Presbyterian family. My mom was from a very modern Jewish family. And they always played down their wealth. They were upper middle class, but prosperous. They never talk about money, never show off. And so in a way, I mean, I hadn't thought about it this way before, but it's a little bit like my family if they had lived then. You want to be judged on your character, your intellect, and how you conduct yourself in the world. I've noticed when, especially younger people, visit the museum and look at it, they assume he's a preacher. He's not. It's almost certain he's not. This is Catholic France. This is not a Catholic priest, and it's not a Protestant minister. It's someone very important.
So one of my favorite subjects, with the head of John the Baptist.
Yeah.
It is. I love turn of the century everything, and that was a really popular subject at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. But this goes much earlier than that, and I think it tells a story just really through her expressions. And it came from the narrative moment here is what's critical. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, yes. So this is Salome with literally the head of St. John the Baptist. This is after she has danced for her father-in-law, and King Herod told her, you can have whatever you want if you'll dance for me. So it is really the story of power corrupting. And she asked for St. John's head on a platter, which is not what he was expecting her to ask for. It's because her mother wanted John killed because he was inconveniently pointing out the fact that her mother had married her first husband's brother, which is a big no-no. So this is about her power, this young woman having power over a king and demanding something she didn't even want. And the way Vouet does it, Vouet being one of the great French Baroque painters, the focus of this story is in her expression. And when you look at it close up, I feel that you see her both excited by her power and troubled by her power. So to me, it's a picture about power and how dangerous it is. There's a lighter side to it, which is that I was able to determine that Vouet made himself the model for the head of St. John. And Salome, the model, is clearly his wife. They were both painters and worked together. So this is actually the product of a very happy marriage. This is an inside joke. But whoever bought it, I don't know. It makes me wonder, did they realize that it's actually the artist and his wife? Or did they just think it was a compelling depiction of a famous story? It's not, here again, it's a religious story meant for a domestic setting. So it's extremely powerful. It's also decorative. It's, by the way, I also thought it would be a very good complement to your portrait, the allegory of painting by Honthorst that's been here since the late 90s, which is a beautiful, playful allegory. That too, I think, is possibly a family portrait in disguise. This is a family portrait in disguise. But also, stylistically, it's a very good example of what Vouet was doing at the end of his time in Rome. In 1627, he goes back to Paris after having made it big in Rome, because the King of France asked him to come back, and he couldn't really say no, because the king had supported him when he was younger and struggling. Now he's famous, the king wanted him back. This is probably one of the last paintings Vouet painted in Rome. So it's beautifully done. I love good storytelling. This evokes an entire story with one image, very masterfully. And then there's also a playful side.
Yeah, and I think different because so much of it's told just through her face, as opposed to a lot of depictions show the dance, show the crowd, show all the stuff going on around this subject, but this is just reduced to the barest essential.
Absolutely, and I think storytelling is at its best when you purposely leave out certain details so that the rest of the action takes place in the viewer's mind.
Another one, kind of like that, Guercino's St. Peter, 1648.
It's true. So this is Guercino in Bologna around 1648. We know that because he kept very good account books, which have survived. So he was paid for this in 1648. It's St. Peter staring at the keys to heaven, thinking about the responsibility that's been put on him. This is too, it's very internal. It's a small painting. It's what in Italian they call a quadretto, meaning it's a pretty little picture that you can put anywhere. It's it's St. Peter thinking about the fact that he's basically now in charge of this project to have a church, which is probably not what he thought he would end up doing when he was a fisherman. It's a lot of responsibility. And here too, it's storytelling, but done in a very indirect way. It's just Peter looking at the key. All of these devotional works, so this is the thing, is I'm not religious, I really like devotional art because it makes you think. And the underlying themes are universal. So it's an aid to contemplation. The point of, in a way, almost everything I've given is that it makes you think. It's partly about beauty, it's partly about history, it's also an internal dialogue. You look at a good work of art, it spurs you to think. And so for me, this is partly about what it feels like to be given a big responsibility. How do you live with that? How do you adjust to that? And it's done in a way that's subtle, which I also like. So Guercino did some very dramatic work, but he also did a huge number of very subtle depictions of stories. And so this is the side of his art I gravitate towards. And it's also from a famous Italian gallery, the Cesare Lampronti Gallery, which is in Rome and London. And it's been around for 110 years. The current owner is the third generation to run it. And they have this enormous stock. So there's something for everyone. But it's the kind of thing, because it's small, it wasn't really being advertised. It's something that I came across by just visiting the gallery and looking at lots of things. So even some of the most famous galleries, they have a lot of stock and they have a lot of things that are not super expensive, but still by very good artists. Yeah.
One of our favorite artists at the Crocker, Albrecht Dürer.
That's right. So the Crocker has this extraordinary figure drawing by Dürer, the first Dürer to come to America. Over time, I've been trying to give prints that help the collection. And even though I've focused more on drawings and paintings, I do really like prints, and I'll never be able to give the Crocker a Dürer painting, but there's still good prints out there. And the reason I chose this one is that when you see it in person, the clarity is so good. The lines are not muddy. This impression is probably 500 years old. And it has survived. It's probably mostly been kept out of the sun in portfolios, beautifully preserved, excellent for teaching. Dürer transformed the technique of printmaking. It's a very complex composition. Incredible skill was required to carve this block. And those early impressions have held up tremendously well. So another thing I'm always trying to do is give the Crocker things that would be good for teaching.
And this came from a gallery in Chicago?
Yes. Oh, yes, from the Johnson Gallery. That's run by the second generation of Johnsons, and the second generation is much older than I am, but they get really good prints because they are always looking. They're very quality oriented, so they would rather have less items, but each be really good.
So they knew this was a really good impression
Oh,
when they
yeah.
sold it. Oh, darn.
This is a really high quality one, which is what they're always looking for.
Got it.
Yeah.
There really is a huge gulf in some
Yeah.
master prints from, things that are just a few $100s because they're way after the artist's lifetime and they're not very well printed, to hundreds of thousands of dollars for original print from the period that's one of the very first. It's a tough field to even engage in.
It's very tough, and that's why you have to look in person, because you cannot trust a reproduction. But I find that, especially for young people who haven't seen a lot of art, if you show them a really good print from the past, they notice the difference because they're so used to seeing low quality reproductions all around them. A good impression feels like a whole nother world. Yeah. Right.
This is very beautiful. Dawn.
Yes.
A series of times of day. 1772, La Grenier.
By La Grenier, yeah, Louis La Grenier. Right. So this is one of a series of 4 that shows different times of day. And originally, all 4 were in a beautiful room in a Paris mansion owned by Monsieur de Julien, he had a great job. He was the treasurer of the Catholic Church in France. So that's an extremely good gig. It means that you can decorate your house very well. This is what's called an overdoor. So you walk through a door and then it's above. So it's meant to be seen from below. And that's why when you see it in the gallery upstairs, it's higher on the wall so that you get the perspective it was meant to have. It's as though we're looking up towards the heavens. So here's mythology. This is the night handing the reins to dawn of the chariot of time. So it's a very poetic depiction of the passage of time. A new day is beginning. And inspired by Virgil, the ancient Roman poet, and others, beautifully done. It also, I am often attracted to these changes in taste. So this is 1772. The Rococo is becoming more restrained. So it is arguably a Rococo picture, but it's starting to look towards the neoclassical a bit. So it's this gradual change in taste that occurs. It's a beautiful example. Two of the scenes are at Oberlin College. This and the other scene were both owned by a private family collection in England. I think they still own the 4th, but they sold off this one very discreetly. And I sympathize because often what happens is that over time, for many of these families, they have huge upkeep costs for their homes. And once in a while, a family has to sell something. It's part of the reason America has such good museums, is that there is a lot of good art in private hands, especially in Europe, and sometimes they have more art and more house and more garden than they can really afford. So that's why something of this quality comes up for sale.
So is the 4, is it dawn, dusk, night and day? Is that
Midday, right. How does it go? Dawn, midday, evening, night.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So this is vivid color and light because it's the dawn of a new day. And I also like the contrast. They're magnificent horses depicted, the beauty of the goddesses in front, night and dawn, behind them, their attendants. It has a lot of the ritual and grandeur of a religious scene, but it's mythology. So it's meant to be decorative, but it's done with such skill.
So this hunting scene by Hondius is really one of my favorites in that it's so whimsical. Is that typical of this era or this artist? There's a lot going on in this painting.
There's a lot going on, right. So this Hondius is really good at animals, and his animals often have more personality than the people. And I know it's a little bit hard to see here, but every one of those dogs has a distinct personality. And so I looked it up, it looks like about 70% of his art includes animals, and the animals are usually the stars. So I thought, all right, I'll give something completely different than all the other stuff. And it's terrific fun. It's a hunting scene, but it's what they call a halt. It's a pause in the day of hunting. And it's playful. I think sometimes people forget that art can be fun. And that's not a new thing. That's always been true. It's whimsical. And the touch don't have any complex about buying art that's playful. It's as far away from the devotional scenes as you can get. And it's also a beautiful landscape. I haven't given that much in the way of landscape, so I thought that's another feature. It's also, if you end up, everyone here likes art, if you end up coming another time and you bring someone who you basically had to force to come with you by bribing them with lunch, show them this, because I think it helps dispel the image that museums are serious and you will be graded. No, the museum should have something for everyone, every kind of taste, every mood. And I think if you can show them that the museum can be fun and there are things like this, then maybe over time you can show them the other things. It's the Dutch and Flemish are so culturally and temperamentally different than the French, even though they live near each other, that I like the fact of the contrast, that this is very close to some of the French pictures we were just showing, and the Italian devotional, and it's a completely different world, even though it's from the same time.
Yeah. So this portrait is such a lovely painting, and you're drawn to portraits, as you said, and you tend to like kind of the three-quarter half views of people. What drew you to this one in particular?
Right, it's several things. So Robert Lefebvre, it's the best portrait painting by him I've ever seen for sale. It started with that. The presence of this sitter is so strong. The mother is so beautifully rendered, and the tenderness between mother and daughter is very touching. It's just dramatically better than some of his other portraits. I think there must have been a good feeling between sitter and painter. You can look up, it's currently in storage, but the LA County Museum has a portrait of a woman by Lefebvre from the same era, sitting on the same couch. And that woman has zero personality. So there was definitely not a rapport there. There is here. I also really liked it because it shows this rising middle class. This is someone who's upper middle class and on the way up under Napoleon. It's a new crowd is coming to the fore. She's wearing this paisley design from India. It's another interesting thing is this late 18th, early 19th century fascination with India, which is a new thing for them. It's just so beautifully done. And I think part of it too is just that over time, well, first of all, with portraiture, it's so hard to do a good portrait where it looks like the person is a real person. The likeness has to be close enough that people can recognize who it is, but you also have to gently improve them because nobody wants to be seen as they really look. But you have to be subtle about it, and you should also try to express something about them, how they dress, how they carry themselves, what they surround themselves with. What do they care about? She's partly showing that she's an elegant woman who takes motherhood seriously. She's showing off her wealth in a way that the sitter for Philippe de Champagne was trying not to do. And it shows a new kind of spirit. The way she's dressed, it also evokes the period sense of what the ancient Romans and Greeks, what they aspired to look like. So in a way, she's trying to connect herself to an old tradition. And it's just beautifully done. It's so hard to bring forth personality, and this does it. Yeah.
So Egon Schiele, if any of you know Egon Schiele, this is not your most typical thing by him, but he was very young when he did it, so it has a lot more basis in the observable world and people than what happens later. So.
Yes, so he was about 16 and a half when he drew this. His technical ability is all there already. You only get this good at drawing if you're doing it day after day and you take it really seriously. It's about a year before he starts trying to do something that we would now call expressionism. So I do really like to see people developing and on the way up. And so he's made zero money so far. He's just starting to see what he can do, and it's beautifully drawn. So, I mean, ideally someday I would like to give the Crocker another Schiele drawing that will be more typical of what you think of. But this came along, and it's just too good to pass up. I actually think in some ways these early portraits, he did a number of them. This is a family friend. He's drawing a friend of his mother who had come over. And it's so beautifully done. I'm starting to think that if he had lived longer, he might have tried to create a synthesis between this and the more expressionist work. But as it is, he started off in this much more traditional vein, and then he tried really hard to distinguish himself as an angst-ridden expressionist. But I think this is just as good.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Sir Thomas
It won't all be
Lawrence.
portraits, but
So this is Miss Glover of Bath from circa 1810 to 15.
yes, by Thomas Lawrence. I have looked for years and years for a good Lawrence portrait to give to the Crocker, and I found this one in New York at a gallery in a show of British art. And I've never, in terms of, there are many Lawrence portraits that come up for sale. They all have merit, but many of them, one of the problems with Lawrence is that he kept getting asked to paint really important people who are really busy and don't want to sit very long. And this is a more normal person. So Miss Glover of Bath, who is, I tried to do some research. It looks like she's from a prosperous but minor landowning family. She probably sat multiple times. It's so beautifully done. There's much more personality. Here too, there's this tremendous play within the blacks, which gets flattened in the photograph. In person, you see there is modeling and variety. Many of the Lawrence paintings that come up for sale show people who are beautiful, and it appears that there's nothing between their ears. I didn't want to do that. I waited until, I feel like this woman looks intelligent and focused. To me, she looks like someone who would be friends with Jane Austen. Someone who's a careful observer. Dangling down to the side is her reading monocle. This is a young woman who wants to be taken seriously, I think. So it's so beautiful, and yet you get the grandeur of a Lawrence painting, but it's a more kind of relatively normal sitter. And it's just beautiful. But it was displayed in New York in an extremely ugly frame, which was not doing it any favors. So I asked if I could just buy the painting, which they were happy to do. And I learned that it was It had been in 100 years ago, it was in one of the finest homes in the Philadelphia suburbs, this incredible mansion, White Marsh Hall, which was eventually torn down, but it had 147 rooms, 300-acre garden. So it used to be the sort of thing that, if you remember the film, The Philadelphia Story, that those people bought things like this. And for a long time, this is what a lot of American collectors wanted. And ever since about the 1940s, this has become less popular. Even though the general public has never stopped liking beautiful portraits, it's the leading families of America, their taste changed. And so it meant that I was able to get this at a good price, and it had been on sale for some years. No one else had come forward. It's kind of shocking, but I've come to the conclusion that there's a certain kind of elegance today that is out of fashion in terms of who's buying art. You put it in a museum, everybody loves it. But for some reason, it doesn't resonate with the collectors the way it would have at an earlier time.
Barbara Deitch. So it's nice to be able to, Deitch? It's nice to be able to add more women to the collection. It's really hard as you go back in time because there are fewer and fewer of them had the opportunity to become artists. So tell us about this.
Yes, this is a wonderful example. I'm always on the lookout for good works by women of the past. And it does help to tell a fuller story of cultural activity. Barbara Deitch was from Nuremberg. So at that time, it's the northern part of Bavaria, the Kingdom of Bavaria. She's from a family of artists and botanists. And she's part of an interesting cultural world in Nuremberg where there were a lot of both scientists and artists. And she was extremely successful. She was offered to be a court painter at the court of Bavaria in Munich. She turned it down because she wanted to stay in Nuremberg with her family and her friends. And she was successful enough she didn't need to move. She had an international list of clients. The thing that I think has done so much damage is that during the course of the 19th century, a lot of these women artists of the 17th and 18th century went out of fashion. And it took a long time. It took the whole 20th century to recover them. But they're back. People are very interested now. But the reason why, for many of you, you may not have heard about someone like her when you took art history classes is that it took a long time for education to sort of catch up with recovering these tremendously talented women. But in the 18th century, there were many successful women artists, and she was one of them. So she actually was able to support herself by making these beautiful botanical studies, which are both art and science. And this is one of the best ones I've ever found, because these poppies and the butterfly are so beautifully rendered. Everything. There are the two insects. She's extremely good with gouache. She draws well. As I've said before, I tend to buy work by people who draw better than I do. She's a good example of that. I could not do this. And it's a tremendously good example. She didn't seem to date her work, so they all end up often either saying no date or circa 1760s, because she was very active, but I think she was probably making art throughout the second half of the 18th century.
We have more things, so we're going to have to pick up the pace if we want to allow people to ask questions.
Right, I'll keep going.
That's all right, but this is one of my favorites, and I want to talk St. Catherine, most beautiful. I think this is the favorite thing for me that you ever gave to the Crocker, because it's so beautiful. And it's mostly about the color, so tell us about that.
Yes, so this is absolutely mannerism in Florence. And the color, it's harder to tell on the screen. When you see it in person, there is this intense grouping of color. It's, it seems to stem from fabric, from what is called shot silk, which is when you weave together thread of two very different colors into one piece of fabric of silk, which means every time you move it all, the color changes for the viewer. And it was something, here again, this is, St. Catherine is not your next door neighbor, she's special, right? So of course her clothing has to be special, her hair, everything, she has to stand out. She's a paragon of virtue. This is a woman who turned down a marriage proposal by the Emperor of Rome because it was more important to her to be a scholar and a Christian than to be rich. And so she's always been a paragon of virtue. And she's shown monumentally with this intense color to make her stand out. This too is for a home. The thinking is that she's an exemplar of good behavior and sticking to your guns when you're pressured. It's extremely vivid, and I thought it would also resonate with a lot of people who like more modern art. And you can see that a lot of color effects that you see in modern contemporary art, it was already happening in 16th century Florence. So every era is somewhat different, but in a more general way, everything that's going on in art today has already happened in the past. And it's informative to look at that.
So this one,
yeah.
You were able to acquire this for a terrific price,
yeah.
And I know his market has changed, so tell us about that.
Right, so this is by Perronneau, one of the leading pastel portraitists of the 18th century. 20 years ago, a similar portrait sold for what in today's money would be over $400,000. Also a beautiful pastel. The market has gradually receded. Again, a certain kind of elegance is out of fashion. Part of another problem is that this photograph, which was what was reproduced in the Sotheby's catalog, the photograph is a little out of focus. It makes it look like it's a little bit muddy around the face, around the mouth. When you see it in person, there is nothing wrong with this portrait. I've looked at it carefully. I saw it in, there was this huge Perronneau retrospective in France, in Orléans, that I saw in 2017. This was one of the stars of the show. It was from a superb Swiss collection, the Izos collection. And Mr. Izos, who was a pastry chef, a middle-class pastry chef, who had one of the best private collections of 18th century pastel. He passed away. He had spent 40 years building up this extraordinarily good collection. His widow wisely sold it at auction, I think, for practical reasons. So there was this tremendous sale in New York this last January. The sale was poorly attended. I was there. I had told William Brazil beforehand, this is my favorite thing, but I'm sure we would be massively outbid, so we shouldn't even try. It didn't sell. So immediately after, I was in shock. Immediately after the sale, I went up to one of the people I know at Sotheby's, and I said, can I make an offer? And she said, sure. And the offer was approved in less than a day. A number of beautiful things in this sale, which included the Izos collection and other works, a number of things either didn't sell at all or barely sold. So there's been this huge change in the market. Oh yeah. This I also recently bought for the Crocker, Rosalba Carriera. So this is a little bit, this is one generation earlier than the Perronneau. but also very 18th century pastel masters. Rosalba is one of the best artists of the 18th century. This, we know, was made in the summer of 1725 because the sitter wrote letters from Venice saying that he was sitting for Rosalba and was excited about it. When you see it in person, you'll see just how magnificent it is. There's a lot of personality here. There's much greater detail in places than Rosalba sometimes did. She's a superb artist, but if she liked you, she made a better portrait. I think she liked the young Viscount. By the way, he's one of the co-founders of the rules of cricket. So he's very big in the cricket world. He was probably great fun to talk to. In person, there's this tremendous subtlety of color and detail in the face and in the clothing. They clearly hit it off. I've been looking for 20 years for a good Rosalba Carriera to offer. And this is it. This is first rate in every detail. There's a fantastic retrospective exhibit of Rosalba Carriera's career that's about to end, that has been in Dresden all summer. I saw it in June. It was outstanding. This is just as good as anything in that show. So it's the thing where you have to be patient. Every year, several Rosalba portraits come up for sale. The quality varies tremendously. So I waited until I found a good one.
And then we have a circle of
yes.
Rosalba too.
So this is really beautiful in person. It's oil, not pastel. Aesthetically, it looks very close to Rosalba and close also to her brother-in-law, who was Pellegrini, another artist in Venice. I'm pretty sure it was by someone who studied with Rosalba. She was a really good teacher. She taught a whole generation of women, a number of whom became professional artists in their own right. So she's extremely influential as an artist, as a trendsetter, as a teacher. She did some oil painting herself, but frankly, this looks better than her work for oil. So I'm pretty sure it's by one of her talented students. A number of those women were still trying to untangle who did what. But this is another thing that I've done from time to time, is try to offer something that's first rate, but either we're not exactly sure who made it, or we're not exactly sure what's being portrayed, but the art value and the history is there. I think it's an allegory of music, which makes sense, and Venice was a great center of music. It could be an idealized portrait of a performer. It could be a fictional, made-up figure. We don't know. But when you see it here too, the photography flattens it, but it's extremely well done.
So we just have about 3 left, and we'll go through them quickly. But this one, very beautiful. Tell us more about Sophie the sitter.
Yes, so the sitter is the sister-in-law of the artist. The artist is Françoise Gérard. This is Sophie. Sophie was married to his younger brother, Alexandre. And the father of François and Alexandre died when the younger brother was only 10. François is 10 years older. He was 20 when this happened. François ended up helping to raise his younger brother. They were close throughout life, and he was very close to Alexandre and his sister-in-law, Sophie. So this is a very personal portrait. Most of Gérard's portraits, which are beautifully done, are of extremely important people, and there's an emotional distance. This is a close family member, and this stayed in the family until at least the 1980s. It's very personal, very much the Romantic era, very unlike other things I've given. I feel like it kind of fills a niche. Beautifully done.
So these are unusual.
Oh, yeah.
The first still lifes, right?
Yes, the only still life paintings I've ever offered. I like still life. I rarely think to offer it, but this pair is so beautiful. Liégeois is one of the many talented portrait artists active in France in the 17th century. It's an area that until recent scholarship was somewhat ignored, but there are all these great still life painters. It's, I think in a way, sort of like times of day in that you're seeing the same elements fresher and then later. The passage of time is there. They will be shown together. You'll see in person tremendous detail done with tremendous care. He's so under the radar in America that I could only find one in any US museum. There's one in storage at the Norton Simon. Yeah.
Another departure for you.
Right. So also for decades, I've been trying to find what's called a fête galante, meaning it's a scene of leisure and courtship in the countryside, popularized by Watteau. This is by one of his key students, Pater. It's so beautiful in person. You get a beautiful landscape, the figures are charming, it's exquisite. This is also out of fashion in the market. There's nothing wrong with this picture. Believe me, I studied it for a long time. There's nothing wrong. It's from the Quatellem Gallery in Paris. Monsieur Quatellem bought it because a client of his was very interested in this sort of thing, and he thought it was going to happen. The client didn't like it. So that does happen. And I was in Paris shortly after this had happened. It was shown to me. And I said yes on the spot because it's really beautiful. Tremendous variety of figures. The trees, everything is beautiful. Monsieur Quatellem kindly had it cleaned for me. The legibility is superb. So it's another thing that I've been looking for a long time that the Crocker didn't have. I think it's really intriguing that the Crocker family bought a lot of wonderful things. They didn't seem to be too interested in this subject.
Right. And then another thing we haven't had ever is this. And
Right.
It took a long time to get this. How did you find it? And
yeah.
how does it fit with our collection?
So when I first started daydreaming decades ago about helping the Crocker, this is one of the things I wanted to do, to give you a Watteau drawing, which the Crocker never had. He's one of my favorite 18th century artists. I mean, you have to be patient. It came from Stephen Ongpin, who's one of the major drawing art dealers based in London. He sees an enormous amount of stuff. I waited and waited until he found a really good one. I studied it carefully. It's a very good example of Watteau. It's not real big, but it's beautifully done. It's so masterfully done. This is someone who drew every day. And his use of the three chalks is just exquisite. You'll see it eventually. You'll see it pretty soon, actually. Right. It'll be up, and the technique is magnificent. So I had to be patient. And I think that what's happened is that if it's not an extraordinary work that really grabs you from across the room, less people are buying that sort of thing. So this was, I have thought about giving the Crocker a Watteau drawing for 40 years. It's one of my original ideas of what I wanted to do, which I thought might never happen. And so basically all my dreams have come true.
It's a perfect note to end our part on. And I did want to say that we do have a show coming up called Drawn to Beauty, which is recent acquisitions of drawings. Opens very soon, next month, I think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, William is out on an extended leave right now. He would have been doing this program. William put that show together. He will be back in later October and probably be talking about that particular show. But you have works that you helped us acquire in that show and many other things from different collectors as well. So any of you have questions for Alan? Yes.
I'm interested in the Strozzi and the Morricone. I'm not sure if I said that correctly. But they're both painted about the same time in Catholic Italy.
Yes.
And there's a halo on the Morricone, but not on the Strozzi. And I just am wondering if you have any comments on that.
Oh, right. Yeah. I have thought about those issues. I think a good way to look at it is really that what's most divine in devotional art is the light. So the communication of who's important and who's divine, or who's acting in a good way, you are directed by the light. And there's this long history in devotional art of often not hitting people over the head with the subject, but being a little bit more indirect. And it's another reason I like that Strozzi, is that if you didn't know the iconography of the Catholic tradition, it might not even be obvious that it's Jesus. It depends how much you know. Because it's this youth, it's a teenager. But the lighting and the care and the orb, it tells you, oh, okay, this is religious, and that it's probably Jesus. But I really like art that is a little bit indirect. And the Morricone, in its way, is actually also somewhat indirect. They're much more heavy-handed depictions of Mary. I think storytelling, visual storytelling, is extremely interesting. And the thing I think we need to all do a better job of is preparing modern viewers for what to look for, to help them be more active viewers. Because so much of art of the past is deciphering the clues. And then you have this moment of discovery when you figure out the story. And I find that really compelling. And it's not just in Western art, it's in Asian art too. That all over the world, there's a long tradition of providing clues, and it's a lot like theater. I read a really interesting book about theater years ago, and one of the things that always stayed with me, it said that a good play does not do the audience's job for them. You need the viewer, you need the spectator to actively engage and to fill in the gaps. So you don't have to have a halo. You don't even have to have other people in the scene. Sometimes you can tell a whole story with one person. And I find that really powerful.
I have two questions. What is your connection to the Crocker?
Oh, yeah.
And where do we see all this?
Oh, right. So it's the fault of UC Davis. Yeah. It's because I went to college at Davis, and the first art history course I took courses in lots of things, but I got really fascinated by psychology and art history. And I had several brilliant art history teachers. And that first class I took, Professor Emerson, he told us, you have to go to the Crocker. It's only 14 miles away. There's no excuse. You have to go. The joke then was that they were not teaching the history art. They were teaching the history of slides, because we were looking at slides every day. And that always stuck with me. And so I made a point. I took the bus from Davis to Sacramento, and I came over here. I think I came on like a Friday afternoon the first time. The place was empty. I went upstairs. It blew my mind. This place is amazing. Even back then, when it was a more modest museum, I thought this is an extremely interesting place. And no one had ever told me about it. And so I love the Bay Area museums, but they have much more robust support than the Crocker does. The Crocker has come a long way, but it occurred to me that I could make a real difference for the Crocker, possibly over time. And it worked.
And you have. And you have. You said 2 questions. Was that it? Oh, where are they?
Oh.
So a lot of them are up in
Right.
the European galleries, but we were going to go up after. That was the original goal. We had an earthquake a few months ago. Some of you might have felt it. We felt it a lot. None of the art was damaged, but it actually cracked some of the historic plaster in the European galleries. So several of these paintings are down right now as we wait to get the walls repaired by the city. So they'll eventually go back up, but we figured the way the city works so slowly, it wasn't going to happen by today, and it didn't. So soon, I hope. Somebody had another question over there?
Yes, so I was an art history major, and I'm a docent here at the Crocker, and I've always loved art. And if you walked into my home, you would see a lot of art on the walls, on tables, everywhere, but you would not recognize any names. For financial reasons, which you don't have to worry about. But just lately, within the last 6 months, I've said to myself, if there's an image, a picture, a work of art that I love by someone so famous that I could never afford it, why not just get a copy?
Yeah.
And so a recent exhibit, and it's a group of nude men against a blue background, and I just fell in love with it, and I bought a print at the Crocker. So my opinion, or my question is, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's fine. I think the reality is, look, I've given some nice stuff recently, but I wasn't always this prosperous. It took a long time to get here. But this is the thing, I've always thought that really art should be for everyone. And it's also why I think it's really important that museums keep admission prices low and that it should be subsidized, because it really should be for everyone. And I think, and for a long time, I had lots and lots of reproductions up. I had lots of posters. For years, when I would travel and see something in a museum I liked, I would try to get either a poster or a postcard or something. And I think it's good. I think you should engage with art in however you can. I was in part motivated to give art because so many of the people I went to school with, both growing up and in college, had limited capacity to travel. And I think I love Northern California, but the fact is we're very far away from a lot of the major cultural centers. So in my mind, it makes sense to improve the permanent collections of Northern California so that, let's say, you're working hard, you've got lots of responsibilities, maybe once a month, you can have a day basically to yourself where you go to a nice museum or you do something else. And I want that time to be beneficial. And so that if you can come here at least once every month or two, you can have a deep engagement with a few works of high quality. It takes money out of the picture. The best thing about having money is that then you don't worry about money. And I want other people to not worry about money so much. So there's only so much, there are limits to what I can do, but I have been able to make a difference, and it's gratifying in a way that other things are not. So I think you should have reproductions at home of things that you love if you can't have the originals, and we often can't. I think it's important to not just look at reproductions, to also have the direct contact with great objects. And I'm trying to make it a little bit more democratic.
I will say, even the Crockers acquired things that were reproductions, and they knew they were. Yeah. At the time, they were painted reproductions, but I can show you a Bronzino quote, and I can show you a Rubens with quotes around it. And they couldn't get those originals at that time, and so they bought something that looked almost the same.
It's true, and I think it's why they bought so many drawings.
Yeah.
It's a really unusual collection for that era in the 19th century that they bought close to 1,300 drawings. That to me says they were serious about art and its history, and it fits into what I've read, that they wanted the Crocker in particular, and Sacramento in general, to be a cultural destination. I mean, in a way, what happened is that it took a long time for other people to then continue that relay race to get where it is now. But the Crockers had a real vision.
They did.
And so I think the 19th century equivalent of buying a good reproduction is you buy a good drawing by the same person. And they did it. It's what got me so excited in the Crocker over 40 years ago, is that this drawing collection is amazing. And it's only in recent years that it's being cataloged more methodically. But it's a really good, for those of us who love drawings, the Crocker is famous.
She wants us to stop.
Well, we want to thank you. We just appreciate everything that you've done for the Crocker. And it's all for our enjoyment, and we just really appreciate all your efforts. So.
Thank you.